Bam! What's up, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and usually taking a topic and doing a deep dive. This week I decided to switch it up before we get into it. What do you got here? I got my man Jesse. What's going on, Jesse? Good to see you, brother, man. I decided to switch it up because I've been getting a couple of questions, and I'm not somebody that necessarily gets a lot of questions regularly. It's not something that is a normal thing, but I have gotten a bunch recently, and I said, you know what? Rather than just finding a topic and putting it out there, every once in a while, I'd like to do these sort of Q&As, these AMAs, whatever the fuck the kids are calling it. Where basically I'm a little bit less structured, and I'm just responding to you guys. So I do have a couple of questions prepared, but if there's anything that you guys have that you want to throw my way, please feel free to do so in the comments. I'm doing this right now I'm streaming on my main YouTube channel and a couple of Facebook pages. So wherever you are, write those things there. Let's see what we got. Aaron, what's up, darling? Good to see you. Big Jamie, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Corey, as expected, good afternoon to you, brother. So I'm going to start off with one of the questions that was posed to me, and I have it here. This is from, I'm not going to name the names of the guys that sent me these questions because I didn't tell them that I was going to use their questions on a live stream, so I'm not going to put the name, but one of the guys, he wrote a bunch of stuff, but he finished with, if therapy isn't the answer for men dealing with stress, what is? And I think, this isn't a big answer. It's kind of straightforward. And if you look at I don't know if it was last week or the week before that, where I said therapy is gay, I think that was the name of the talk. I advocate for an external sort of anchor to people's storyteller, right? So what do I mean by that? I'm speaking in my own, special language and verbiage, which isn't very polite of me. I have a program called the Identity Frame, and it's a model that I have a video for. I think it was in PressureCon, one of the PressureCon. I think it was in the PressureCon programs, where I talked about the Identity Frame. And basically, one of the components of an identity, I'll show it to you right now. This is the only thing of mine that I've ever put up on my own wall. Right? So the identity frame. Right? So the identity frame is like, okay, how does this work? What are the components of an identity? And it's the self-image, the narrative, and the projection, or I call it the man in the mirror, the storyteller, and the mask, right? So the storyteller is somebody that is probably most vulnerable internally to stress, to outside stress. When we're getting stress, it's starting to compound and we're starting to get overwhelmed. We start telling ourselves different stories. Now, therapy, a lot of times is, and I understand it's a bit of a reductionist take on it, but therapy is sharing those stories. It's finding out where those stories are from. It's talking about the root causes of those stories. And it's basically backward facing in terms of where its priority is. It's looking at your past. What has happened up until now? I think there is value in resolving unresolved issues. I do not think there is value in discussing experiences that are no longer affecting you at the moment. I have a much more forward-facing approach to dealing with this. So specific to the storyteller, I'm the guy that says when you're really, really depressed, go for a walk, go work out, go do something that gets your state out of that sort of anchor to the internal spiral, right? You want to be outside. I used an analogy in that call. I don't know if it was last week, the therapy one that I did, where I said, trying to sort of figure out your problems while sitting and just contemplating at some point is like somebody falling off of a roof and trying to hold himself tight enough so he no longer falls. There is a point where you need to anchor yourself, to something external. And that's my approach. So if it isn't therapy dealing with stress, and I'm not here to say that therapy's never helped somebody deal with stress. I just don't think it's something that builds the man. So just because we've sort of put the fire out doesn't necessarily stop or prevent the fire from happening again. So hope that makes sense. Uh, Johnny Groove writes, "What's up, Johnny?" He says, "I never got a notification. Even searching won't give me results. They're hiding you." Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but not surprised, and it wouldn't be the first time. Those of you guys that have been following me for a while, and Johnny Groove, you're definitely one of them. You guys know that for some reason the algorithm and I just don't get along. There's just an acceptance that I got, or that I made had. What do you do in an acceptance? Whatever it is, about 10 years ago at this point, and I said, okay, they're just gonna sabotage anybody, and I was never so naive as to think that that wouldn't be the case, but there is a point where I needed to start actually building an infrastructure that was protected, from the whims of whatever big tech decides to do. Not everybody was that prepared. There are a bunch of guys who I used to watch regularly. Who's the guy? Red Elephants? Vincent James. I remember Vincent James, they shut his shit down and he was in a fucked up spot because of it. I don't know all the specifics, obviously. I've never met Vincent. But I do know that he's somebody that had a lot of entertaining stuff, back in the day on YouTube, and suddenly his channel was gone. There's a whole collection of people. I'm not going to go down the names, but if we don't understand that we're playing, on their playground, then we're exposing ourselves to a vulnerability that I think is just unnecessary. Every man should build an infrastructure that allows him to survive decisions made by other men, right? So there should be no man that makes a decision that is going to determine the outcome of your life. Not that it's not going to influence the trajectory of your life, but we don't want to build a sort of house on somebody else's land, so to speak. All right, what else? What else is going on? I have another one here. With the chaos happening around the world, how should a man prepare his family and tribe for what's coming? It's another question I was given over these last few weeks. Like, here's the thing. There is nothing coming, yet everything is coming. The argument that I make is for a man to be as strong and powerful as he could possibly be. If you've done everything, quote unquote, right, to do what was in your power, to be the most successful man you could be, and let's say a fucking meteor hits the earth, an extinction level event, there is nothing owed to you by the universe because of your preparation that it should alter the trajectory of that meteor. I think it is foolish to think that through a certain amount of effort builds a sort of debt in the form of expectation. I've done all this stuff. How come it doesn't always work out? Well, I would say the big problem is you think doing this stuff somehow compels the universe to make it all work out. And that's just not the case. I read a book years ago called The Path of Least Resistance. It was by a guy named Robert Fritz. And Robert Fritz is an interesting character. He was a music composer. I think he still is a music composer. And he had this, he had this whole sort of model of philosophy. And I don't know if he would call it a philosophy, but models and frameworks that allow people to become more effective, explaining why people do the things they do. And he had this great analogy called oscillation. And what he would say, how he describes oscillation is, there are things you want to do in your life that the more you want to do them, there's a sort of tension that pulls you towards those things. And he uses the analogy of a room. And those things that you want to do being a sort of rubber band that's pulling you. It's attached to the wall in front of you, and it's pulling you towards the front of the wall. But then he says that people have these stories, and there's a whole collection of things that people simultaneously have, their belief system, etc., where there's a rubber band in the back wall that's pulling you back there. And the more motivated you get, you pull yourself towards that, the more reality sets in at some point. When motivation wanes, you get pulled back to where you were. And there's that oscillation pattern that people tend to display over time. It's in that vein that I would describe what a man should do as being create tension forward. It's not about the expectation in some form of debt, as if we can compel reality to bend to our will with any degree of certainty. It's more about, and I've used this phrase, a man should do a day's worth of work daily. A day's worth of work done daily, number one, tells you that all you could do today is what is possible today. You can't do anything more. But the standard of the individual should be measured not on necessarily how much he could do, certainly not more than what he could do, but how much of what he could do that he actually does. If you could do 100 units of productivity a day where you do 80 is worse than a day where you do 90. A day where you do 70 is better than a day where you did 50. But that sort of comparative analysis doesn't hold you to a standard that says I'm still not doing 100, which is what I'm capable of. So just because you did 70 for 10 days in a row and then you have a 90, unit of productivity day, it doesn't mean that you should celebrate. You deserve some sort of promotion or feedback of anything positive. It's really, well, it's a more productive day than those days, but I'm still capable of 100. So how we decide to look at progress, success, and what our responsibilities are from day to day really determine, what we're supposed to be doing, we're not supposed to be doing. As far as, with everything going on in the world, what was the phrase that this person used? With all the chaos happening around the world, how should a man prepare his family and tribe for what's coming? I would counter that by asking, if those things, the chaos and everything happening wasn't perceived to be happening, should you prepare your family any differently? I think there's the problem. I prepare my family to be as hard as possible. That means that there's some amenities and some comforts that I consciously choose to withhold or refrain from participating in. Like the easy one, we're having a little bit of a hot streak in the Northeast here. I don't have air conditioning in my house. That is not comfortable, right? The irony is I have air conditioning in my office, right? Everyone's like, well, how the fuck does your wife deal with this? Like, listen, I wish this air conditioning was not in the office, but I have a bunch of equipment here that'll get fucked up. This thing turns into a sauna when it gets hot. But the idea of it is I want them to be as powerful as possible. I describe power in two different facets, right? There's internal power and external power. Internal power I call self-power. Self-power is the ability for an identity to maintain its integrity despite the growing stressors from the environment. I describe it as like the hull on a ship, or a submarine. It could dive more deeply without bending because the hull is so strong. That's what self-power is. It doesn't mean that you are necessarily externally powerful, but it means whatever you are, you always are. I remember having a conversation with my buddy, Dan Luna, a couple of years ago. Dan Luna, retired SEAL. He had some self-deprecating joke, because he's a humble dude where he's talking about, I think at the time he was pursuing a doctorate, side note, he's now Dr. Dan Luna, but at the time he was pursuing this doctor's degree. And he was saying, he's not really a big brain, smart dude. He's got to work hard and everything. And I wasn't buying that shit because Luna is very intelligent. But I told him one of the things that makes him, unique, in a specialized way is whatever he lacks in speed, he makes up for in torque in terms of cognitive abilities. Whoever he is when it's sunny out is the same person he is when he's in the middle of the chaos. And that is what I would say is a commentary on self power. So, one aspect of power is that internal power, what I call self power. Now, the other one is external power, right? The external power is what I call the real power. And real power is what I would say most people would accept as the definition of power. It's the ability for an individual to influence or control their ecosystem. It's what changes can we make outside of our bodies that benefits us, that follows our preferences. And so the idea is to become as powerful as possible, both internally and externally. Now, what that looks like, it's going to be very, preference based, very individual based. There are some people who they make a lot of money and they buy a lot of fancy things. If somebody were to buy $100,000 car, right, which is a very common thing, like in sports, when somebody signs some big deal, they buy a really expensive car. In order for that to be aligned with who he is, he needs to value having that kind of a car. I'm not somebody that values like fancy cars. Like I've never wanted a Lamborghini or Porsche or any of these other things that I don't even know how to pronounce some of the fancy cars that are out there nowadays. I've never been somebody that valued that. So that acquiring that wouldn't necessarily be indicative of me becoming more powerful. I'm much more of I guess, utilitarian, based when it comes to the things that I acquire, the assets that I have. Now, sure, that's a little bit of bias, according to who I am, but it's also, people need to understand any power you have that is limited to an aquarium, right? Limited to some sort of artificial environment is not really yours. It's yours circumstantially. It's like the guy who, when he puts on his VR headset, he's this 7-foot super barbarian. But when he takes it off, he's a 125-pound nothing. It's like you're only powerful in that environment where those things are valued. There are some places where, if you had $100,000 watch, they would look at you and it would be a status symbol. It would not only reflect who you are to the people around you, but it also might weigh more favorably on potential alliances because of what you represent with that sort of token of wealth. But throw that person in the middle of the jungle, the middle of some sort of natural setting, and aside from telling time, that watch might not have much more utility than, my $60, $70 Fitbit, that I'm wearing. So context is important when it comes to external power, but these are things that, I think about regularly. And when people ask me things about like, what should I do with my family? It's like, well, I don't know. How powerful do you want your family to be? How addicted or embedded is the aquarium in your family's identity? One of the things that I think helped me build a strong internal power growing up was we moved a lot, when I was a kid. We moved a bunch. So I was forced to sort of reestablish myself in different social groups. My mother, Italian Irish, my father, born and raised in Puerto Rico. When I was with the white kids, I was the Puerto Rican kid. When I was with the Puerto Rican kids, I was the white boy. I had a lot of reminders of who I was because there wasn't necessarily an environment that I was embedded in effectively enough to allow my identity to become attached to it. So I existed outside of these things, even though I was a part of them. So that helped me significantly. But to draw a contrast, I also know there are people who their environment is so consistent, their environment is so sort of repetitive that they don't understand how to be themselves if they were to be removed from that environment. I've spoken to people in the military before who, upon getting ready to leave the military, maybe they put in 10, 15, 20 years, 20 plus years in the military. A common, sentiment I've heard from those guys is, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, or this is me, I am this. Like, how am I going to do this once I'm out? And I have to, sort of beg their pardon and say, well, you were somebody before you joined the military. When you were in the military, I'm sure there were chapters of you doing different things when you were in the military. So this is nothing but yet another chapter. So I have to remind them that they were the ones who existed in all those different environments, but they were not the environment. The environment was not them. Right. So again, how do you prepare your family, given all the chaos and what's going on in the world? I would argue that, number one, this is probably the safest time in the history of mankind to be alive, especially if you're in a first world country. But I think regardless of that, the idea is to become as strong as you could be, right? In a little over a week, I'm having my PressureCon event, and the theme of this year's event is will to power, which is a Nietzschean concept where he talks about the core drive of people being to become more powerful. I'm in complete agreement. How that manifests itself. There might be some nuance where I might differ, but the gist of it is, if you're somebody who thinks this is a uniquely dangerous time, like, you're not paying attention to history, and I would argue that if it was safer, would you want to be less powerful as a result? Which I would argue no. Again, just like we can't expect things to be wonderful all the time, we also can't expect them to be terrible all the time. Basically, you don't want to build who you are based on some sort of expectation of what reality is going to feel like moving forward. Hey, it's going to be I'm going to be, well, let me, rather than draw up a hypothetical like that, I'll make an analogy or just an observation probably. People were becoming so sedentary that we developed gym culture to compensate for the sedentary lives that we were living on a large scale. What is the gym culture if not a simulated throwback to when people's lives were much more physically exhausting, physically engaging? The day was much more physically laborious, go back 100 years, 200 years. Now, and obviously there are still those people that are like that today, but that's what gym culture came from. I'm born and raised in the city. Unless you played sports, there wasn't really a reason to do anything physical. And a lot of shit sitting down today. I'm sitting down right now. Like, later on after this, I'm going on a hike. I got a 5-mile hike planned today. It's fucking hot, right? It's like it's going to be a pain in the ass, but I got my my roadmap or my trail planned. I have my equipment standing by. I have a list, an audio list of things I want to listen to when I'm out there. But if I had a very physical job, I wouldn't have to do any of that. I'd benefit from it, obviously. But my point is, we evolved in an environment that's so dissimilar, so different than what we actually live in, that we have to supplement it with these rituals. About 10 years ago, I made one of my programs function first. And the whole goal, the whole premise of that program was to have people understand that we're not going to live in a natural environment anytime soon. That's the premise that I'm operating from. So I argue for a sort of hybrid model where we're in an artificial environment, but we aggressively ritualize natural events, natural rituals. We have to be able to do the things that connect us to the environment that allowed us to, or that we evolved in the first place. Those are the things that make people feel better. I was watching a video, it's had to be months ago at this point, where there's Japanese people tend to figure some shit out. They have a good take on a lot of things. And one of the things they have is this idea of being in nature to heal your body. and heal it mentally. To the extent of which healing occurs, I wouldn't know. But the basic sentiment is going in nature and walking in nature to feel better. It's like they have a word for it, right? Because it's a thing to them. Whereas it's something that we can maybe casually describe and talk about, they actually have a word, right? Because they understand the connection of nature to our bodies and sort of synchronizing ourselves to what that is. I remember when I first heard of the term sleep shift disorder. It was, people who are flying cargo planes and whatnot, where like their regular, daily cycle of sleep is just altered all the time. It was how, if you guys have ever heard of modafinil, it was the origin, like it was originally created to help people with sleep shift disorder. So basically, they could stay functional and still be able to sleep at the end of it. Well, when you look at people who don't synchronize their sleep to the night and day patterns, there is a toll to be paid. There's a cost suffered by the individual, and it's just another thing that shows us how synchronized to nature our body evolved being. And there are things that we need to maintain contact with in order to maximize, I would say, just the capabilities of our body. So what else is going on? If you guys got a question, put it in there. I got another couple planned, but I'd much rather answer questions that you guys have. What do we got there? Mark, what's going on, brother? Niels, what's going on, dude? John Wiley, good to see you, brother, man. So I'm going to get one more from my list here. All right, you guys want to get controversial? Because there's a whole bunch of J questions I get regularly. Right, so I don't know. Should I do the Israel question, or should I do the Epstein question? Or are those two different questions? All right. So I got a couple of questions. I'm not going to read just one of them because I don't think it fleshes out exactly what I want to put down in its entirety. A common sentiment is asking me, like, do I think, like, okay, let me start from the beginning. If you guys remember, like sometimes, I think it was last year or something, I made an Israel Palestine video during one of these live streams. And I said it was the only video I was going to make on it. And I think just touching on it during a video is not making a new video on it. So I think I'm still good as far as what I said. But one of the things I will say is, having seen what has transpired from that conflict moving forward, I think that everybody mistakenly has established this false dichotomy of, do you support Israel or do you support Palestine? I do not have an opinion on the value of Israel to Israelis. So just think of what I said there. The value of Israel to Israelis, I would imagine they look at it the way we look at America. I don't know. I'm not Israeli. The Palestinians' plight is one that I would not want my family to be a part of. I would not want my family to endure what the Palestinians are currently enduring. All that being said, that has nothing to do with America, the country I'm in, and all the people that I care about. If I had family in that region, I would be concerned. If I was a member of that region, by default, I would be concerned. But I think the rejection of the support of Israel should not rely on the sort of taking on of the plight of the Palestinians. I don't want the U.S. to send any money to Israel. I don't trust Israel. I think Netanyahu's a piece of shit. I think he's been a piece of shit for a long time. I think he might be a little bit of a bitch too when it comes to his wife. She seems to run a lot more shit than a wife of a fucking prime minister should. Um, I think it's disgusting how American politicians cower to the Israel lobby, and the amount of money that they take from the lobby seems to coincide with the amount of fight they have in support of Israel in the American political landscape. I think all of that is deplorable. I think anybody that holds an American office at any level should not be allowed to have a dual citizenship. Uh, like I have a lot of, pro-American positions that counter Israeli desires, right? All that being said, though, the plight of Palestinians has nothing to do with any of the things that I just criticized. The people that are suffering in Palestine, like this, I don't wish that on anybody. I wouldn't play a role in any of that. I don't want it like seeing, like who wants to see babies getting blown up? And like, there's obviously all these emotional, just sort of landmines that are there when we're discussing what's happening in Palestine. And my intention is not even to diminish the significance of it, the Palestinians' plight, even though that's kind of what I'm going to do right now. Because I would also like to bring up that it is not the only conflict in the world where people are suffering. So, what is it about them specifically that makes us expose ourselves as a country to get in the middle of this? I think people, and I'm not some, like, well, no, I'm not going to shit on myself too significantly here. I am not somebody who operates in the political science realm, with my commentary and what it is that I do. So I understand there's a limitation to the grasp of some of the nuances of what's happening. I understand that, I acknowledge that. However, I refuse to believe that there are not other people suffering as significantly as the Palestinians are, if not more. What makes them so special? I think when you look at the influence that Israel has over the U.S. political system, you see why people who are against that interest want to support the enemy of Israel. Something of a simplification, I get it. But again, my greater point is, why should I be invested? Why do I have to be pro-Palestine in order to be anti-Israeli interest? Let's talk about the Epstein thing for a sec, right? So they came out yesterday, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, saying that basically the Epstein thing's closed. Nothing to see here. There's no list, directly contradicting other videos that people in the administration had made on different shows over the last couple of years. Never mind that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, basically campaigned on this idea of sharing the list, and now, like apparently it was all a misunderstanding or something. It's like obviously like there's a point where why do politicians do this? And the argument doesn't have to be any more complicated than because they can, because nothing happens to them. Wouldn't you do what you want if there was no consequence for doing it? So that's like, there's no mystery where that's concerned. Where the mystery resides in some people's positions is in this expectation that somehow these individuals are supposed to be, objectively moral. And their objective morality needs to coincide and overlap with our own objective morality. I think you guys need to wake up, those of you that, share those positions. I prefer to be what, one of the things they said in The Princess Bride, greatest movie ever made. I prefer to be a man of action, not somebody that relies on lies, not somebody that misstates reality just because it's a little bit more palatable to do so. It's like I understand that none of these people are looking out for me and my family. I think the mistake that people make is think that they are, or they're supposed to even. No, they're supposed to do whatever makes them the most powerful, right? Let's talk about a little Nietzsche for a second. Why would you expect these people not to accumulate power? It's not about electing people that aren't power hungry. It's about maintaining the existence of consequences when we catch them acting in their own self-interest at the expense of ours. That's where this gets regulated. It's not in these people pursuing their own self-interest. Of course they will. Why are they doing it now? Because there's no consequence for not doing it. Like you look at what Israel's doing. Israel, and I said this before, it's like if the Palestinians don't want Israel to be there, then do something about it. But they can't do something about it. I would argue then either build up your power to do something about it or just change the way that you're looking at your life. Because despite what you would want to believe, despite what you think, universally is moral, might is right. Might is what makes right. Most people do things in their self-interest first and foremost because they can. Any other reason besides that, it's like, well, it's defined as their self-interest. So that should answer all the questions. There's some things that are in my self-interest that I don't pursue. Yeah, because you can't. Because if you could, why wouldn't you? You literally labeled it as being in your self-interest. Yeah, but it's unfair to my allies. So then it's not in your self-interest. If doing it would sabotage your allies in a way that would think that would make it not worth it to you. So my whole thing is just be consistent. I voted for Donald Trump. I like Donald Trump's character. And let me restate that. I like the character he plays, I mean. That's what I mean by that. I think he's entertaining. I think he's a breath of fresh air. I think he's enough of a chaos agent that it disrupts some of the strongholds that some of the bad actors have had on our political system. But at no point do I think Donald Trump, nor have I ever thought Donald Trump was the savior. That's the mistake that people make. It's like, oh, what happened to your guy? What happened to your guy? It's like, I mean, right now, as bad as Trump is being, and I do think he's being ironically deplorable in a lot of ways. Could you argue that Harris would have been better? I don't think so. So then it's like, well, if Trump is better than Harris, then obviously we would prefer Trump. Yeah, but look at all the things he's doing. But that's fine, but that's a separate issue. Then should we have voted for Harris? Again, I just don't understand the logic of people who are like, I'm not voting because I'm not supporting the system. It's like if you aren't supporting the system, not being in the system does nothing to the system. Right? So because they say they're not supporting the system, but they say it as if it's actually going to do something to the system. It's like if you don't want to be in the system, or if you think the system shouldn't be, then you should do something to stop the system. Again, it's just I don't understand the logic, the consistency of it. I think everybody should follow their own self-interests. I think those self-interests obviously at some point scale to the alliances and the synergies that are created by alliances. I believe in being a good ally. I believe in being reliable and loyal, in terms of alliance. But I'm also under no delusions that there is some sort of universal good or evil. And I don't want to go down that road too much. That becomes a different talk. Corey writes, even the most politically neutral people are now recognizing the parasitic relationship we have with Israel. Many come to the conclusion that they need us, but we don't need them. So why do we allow it? I would argue that we allow it because the people who give them what they want have been positioned in the alliance in a way that benefits them. And what benefits these people that help Israel does not benefit the people that those individuals represent. Basically, when politicians are in Israel's pocket, there isn't a mystery as to why Israel gets what it wants. There's a lot of, and if you guys saw Ted Cruz on Tucker Carlson, it was such a great expose of the narratives put against, real-time scrutiny. This idea of the Bible, the Christian Bible, saying that you should bless Israel, or like whatever that whole thing is. I'm not a Christian. I don't read that. I haven't committed it to memory, but the sentiment being Israel is something that Christians should support. And Tucker Carlson pushed back immediately and was like, so you're saying that, thousands of years ago, however long the Bible was written, probably wasn't thousands of years ago, that they were referring to the state that was created in 1948. Like that's what they were talking about. It's like, no, there's this idea of it that has nothing to do with the government of it. I mean, if they had called Israel something other than Israel, they wouldn't have the benefit of that narrative. Right? If they called it like what'd you call it? Jewistan? Jewistan, maybe. If you called it something else, you wouldn't have that benefit. Just because you mentioned a name doesn't necessarily mean that is what that sentiment is referring to, let alone the legitimacy of the sentiment at all. Like, who gives a shit? They're like, listen, our people were here thousands of years ago. This is our land. And they're talking to some guy that was like, motherfucker, we were here like 50 years ago. like you're living in my fucking house, you son of a bitch. And the thing is, it's like everybody's looking for the right story to make the good guy. That's where the struggle is here. It's like, well, we need more information. So what? So we can figure out who the good guy is. Like, it's a bad premise to start with. It's the wrong framework to use. It's not about the good guy. It's about understanding that one side is stronger than the other side. The reality reflects that disparity in strength. And then as a third party actor, how do I now create alliances that benefit me, if there are any alliances that benefit me at all? I don't fucking know. I don't want to be in charge of any of it. I'll tell you that shit right now. Jamie writes, always choose bad over worse. Move the ball down the field, and maybe when the choice will lie between good and bad, or even good and better. I agree, because here's the thing: there is a dichotomous nature to some options, right? To movement. It's like move instead of don't move. Be good instead of bad. Pursue your tribe's best interests instead of another tribe's best. Like, there are some dichotomies that help us navigate, where we should be moving in these situations. But everything gets sabotaged when the premise begins with there is a universal right, and we have to figure out what coincides with that. That's where things start getting unreliable. I think when you understand that everybody is looking to become more powerful, everybody has, the will to power, right? Then it starts to make sense. It's the paradigm that puts everything in a way that is consistent and almost predictable. I can predict that everybody's going to move in their self-interest. What else, guys? I got some other questions on masculinity and stuff. I don't think I'm gonna deal with that. The other day, I'll talk about this. The other day, there's a guy in the sport jiu-jitsu world named Josh Saunders, who what was? Oh, Aaron, I'll get to that in a sec. Thank you for that. A guy named Josh Saunders who had shared a bunch of the Thulian, maybe Thulian Society's Instagram. I don't know, some, Eurocentric identity type, page or whatever. And the aesthetics were, not to the algorithm's likings. And this guy had put that, and a whole bunch of people started jumping down this guy's throat. You know, he had a bunch of things talking about who is descended from, and just basically being proud of being European, being proud of all the things that sound off all the alarms for the cunts of society. And true to form, they were alarmed. And I don't know. I haven't checked today or even late yesterday, but I could only assume that there's either two ways that the guy goes, or maybe three ways. One way is he apologizes because he's just not about that conflict. Number two, he apologizes because he doesn't give a fuck about what anybody thinks, but he's just here to make money, which you can talk about that. Or the third option, he just ignores it and hopes it goes away. So I want to see exactly where he goes. Or no, maybe a fourth option is he just keeps doing it. Maybe I should give him a fair shake. I don't know the guy, I never met him, but I'm interested to see where it goes. But there's so many people, and I use jujitsu as an example all the time because I have a jujitsu school, or I have a school that teaches jujitsu. Let me not fucking misstate that. I've been doing jujitsu over 20 years. There's this idea that there's a community. There's not a community. There's a culture that is common for many different groups. There are many communities who share this culture. There is not an arching community to be spoken of. And to think like that is weak. To think like that is it's the herd mentality. It's we're all going to get together because that's what's going to beat the strong person. And it's I think in this artificial society, the best way to battle it is to just never apologize. Number one, like I'm never supportive of anybody apologizing for who they are. Yeah, but if I don't get well, you can choose to play the game if you want. But if you have enough people making you apologize for who you are, and your argument for doing it is the acquisition of resources, I would question, number one, the validity or the actual value of those resources to you. And number two, why you haven't created a way where you don't have to sell your identity out in order to acquire them, i.e. become more powerful. Anyway, I think most people, there is a tendency to just look at everybody like we're all part of the same group. And it's irresponsible, it's naive, and it's how we're controlled in a society. When people are functionally committed to who they are at an individual level, and then their group that they're connected to, their legacy is connected to, i.e. their tribe, everything else works more effectively because everything then is a series of negotiations where everybody benefits. There could only be a mutual benefit between two groups if each group acknowledges the identity and sovereignty of the other. But as soon as the argument becomes, no, you're not you, because of this criteria that exists beyond both of us, you're actually part of me and I'm a part of you, you start to lose your voice in the discussion. Next thing you know, there's one guy at the top of the pyramid that's telling everybody else how they're supposed to be. So the guy, Josh, I hope he keeps it real, but I'm not paying his bills, so he can do what he wants. All right, Aaron writes, addicts alone are the ones who give value to the dealers. And it's one of my quotes from the email the other day. By the way, if you guys are not getting the email, go to masterchimletter.com, get it on my emails. Addicts alone are the ones who give value to the dealers. And, we could say that what I just said applies to that idea that there's so many things in life that we would want to sort of fall by the wayside because we feel strongly that they should. But in order to do that, we tend to have the argument that, hey, we should all just be against this, because if we're all against this, then it won't have so much power over us. And I think there's just a level of scale where that logic doesn't stay rooted in reality. I think a stronger position to take is, I don't like that, I don't need that, so I'm not going to pursue that. And if everybody took care of what they're doing at the level of self, all those artificial or detrimental aspects of society would fall by the wayside. It's like, all right, drug dealers, bad. They're so bad. Well, the drug addicts are the ones that are giving them the value they have. So can we punish the drug addicts? Nobody would accept that. No, we got to punish these people. I would just say, and obviously if you're in a position of political influence, your obligations are different. But for somebody who's not in that political game, the idea is for you not to be a drug addict and your people not to be drug addicts. I talk about abortion. Are you pro-life or pro-choice? I'm pro-me. I'm pro my tribe. Any woman outside my tribe that wants to kill their baby, I don't give a fuck. Oh, that's crass, that's deplorable, that's disgusting, that's this, that's that, says the person who also wants to bomb this country or that country. It's like, all right, you can sit here and act like, the rules are fucking different for you. I just understand what's what. It's like, oh, this blue-haired trans lesbian wants to abort his baby. You gotta say, get the pronouns right. So that works. I don't know. You guys know what I'm saying. And it's like, we have to make abortion illegal so the babies. It's like, listen, I don't know how hard I want to fight to have some blue-haired chick that fucking screams about everything in the first world being terrible. I don't know how much I want to fight her killing a fucking baby. It's like, we got to have fucking standards, obviously, and people could argue what the standards are. I don't give a fuck either way, But all that being said, the reason I don't give a fuck is because the women in my tribe, I'm going to be like, no, you should not get an abortion. Why? Because that kid's going to be one of us. Oh, but they're so expensive. No, they're not. They're not. It's very similar to the arguments I would have with people about homeschooling years ago. It's like, oh, I can't afford to homeschool. Why can't you afford to homeschool? And then they read all the things they have bills for. And it's like, how many of those things do you not need? It's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, all right, you have 2 cars. Do you need 2 cars? Oh, well, I have a car. My wife has a car. Like, everybody. Oh, you think everybody has 2 cars? It's just like, do what you fucking want, but don't tell me that you can't afford it when you have all these bills that I just don't understand why you would need them. The $5,000 family trips to Disney World. It's like, oh, you're a fucking idiot. If you're spending $5,000, if you are not, doing really well and you're spending $5,000 to bring the family to fucking Disney World so your kids can see Mickey, you're a fucking idiot. Anybody that I know, I probably won't say it to them like that, because if you've already done it, then, you ain't ringing that bell. But as a general position, it's like, this is how they get you. They try to they've convinced you that having things is better or more valuable than having children. That's how you know what they're doing is working. I'd rather have the vacation, the second car, the 80-inch TV, the fancy fucking house, than a son, than a daughter. It's like, I don't fucking, I can't relate to that. Sorry. Super Honky, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Corey writes, former pro MMA fighter Jake Shields hosted a debate between Dan Bilzerian and Adam King on the Jewish question. It's surprising to see these conversations allowed to happen on YouTube lately. Well, YouTube has certainly turned the corner. and I'm under no delusions. They could turn the corner back the other way whenever they want. Um, I know Jake for a long, long time. It's very interesting to see the direction that he's taken. I never pegged him for somebody who's going to be this, this counterculture, figure and stuff. But good on him. He seems to be crushing it. I'm not I don't know who Adam King is. I'm not a big fan of Dan Bilzerian, but I will say, you know, their control on media and on, just American identity is slipping, and you're starting to see it rear its head in different ways. I would say this is certainly an example of that. Aaron says, it's amazing how expensive so many people say having kids is. Then again, they're usually the ones that pay a daycare. And there's all those inconsistencies. Well, I need my me time. I need my alone time. It's like, listen, do what the fuck you want. Like, I don't care. Anybody that tells me that kids are too expensive, they're not. It's just they're too expensive to have while maintaining all the things that you've been convinced you need. That's the problem. Jamie writes, apparently Grok AI on X has loosened the restriction regarding the Jewish question. I haven't used Grok in some time. Maybe I should start playing with it again. Aaron writes, got to pay for gas, insurance for your car's daycare. I bet if they cut out daycare and stop working, well, that's the thing. It's like, I don't know, man. Like, I live here in Pennsylvania. I don't have $100,000 car. I don't have a mansion. I don't have, we don't take vacations all the time. I don't have a whole lot of fancy anything, but I have 4 healthy kids that eat good food, that exercise every day, that spend time with us every day, that are intelligent, that are driven. Like, but I guess you have the fancy car and the gold chain and the trip to fucking Disney World. I like my end of it. But again, that, like, to each his own. All right, man, we've been going at it. All right, let's call it there. This is good. A little bit of a different thing. I wanted to keep it open ended. The next time I do something like this, maybe I'll put some feelers out early on to get more questions, because there's always a delay too. So sometimes you guys are asking things and I'm not seeing it, so I'm already answering something else. But let's call it there. If you guys are not getting my emails, go to masterchimletter.com and sign up. The link is in the description no matter where you're watching. But I will be here next week as usual. So, as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.